I will never forget the night when silence spoke louder than any word. Inside that crowded cathedral, where thousands expected just another show of arguments and sarcasm, I witnessed something I never thought I would see. A man feared for his eloquence falling to his knees before a child. In that moment, I realized my life would never be the same. I had gone to watch a debate like so many others, curious only to see another victory of the priest who ridiculed any opponent. But before a 5-year-old girl from a humble family, the giant collapsed. And I, who thought I was just another spectator, discovered that I was part of a story that would pierce my heart for the rest of my life. My name is Miguel Torres. I am 50 years old, and I am from the United States. For decades, I lived believing that faith was merely a battlefield of ideas, where the one best prepared intellectually would always come out victorious. I never imagined that God would choose a moment of vulnerability to reach me. That is why, before continuing with my testimony of conversion, I want to open my heart to you who are listening now. Perhaps, like me, you have relied only on reasoning, trying to silence any inner voice. But it was in the silence of that night, and not in the applause of the crowd, that I found the truth that transformed everything in my life. Before continuing with my conversion story, write in the comments where you are watching from. I want to know how far this testimony of mine is reaching. That day began as a grand spectacle. The streets near the cathedral were filled with journalists, onlookers and defenders of different religions. The whole city spoke about the debate, and I confess that I went more out of curiosity than faith. Deep down, I wanted to see another performance by the famous Father Leonard, known as the Lion of Truth. For many, he was a kind of modern gladiator, able to use words as sharp weapons. People didn't go there in search of spiritual answers, but for a show where the winner was always announced in advance. As I entered that immense hall, I felt the energy of the crowd. Every seat was taken, cameras broadcast live, and reporters whispered in the front rows. The air smelled of expectation, like before a great concert. When Leonard appeared, imposing in his cassock, the applause was so strong that it echoed through the church's vaults like thunder. He didn't look like a priest, but a general ready to march to yet another victory. The first questions began. Students, community leaders, even Muslim scholars dared to raise their challenges. And what I saw was a parade of quick answers, agile counter-arguments, and an audience that laughed when the opponents were left speechless. Leonard dismantled each intervention as if cutting through paper, effortlessly, without hesitation. That fueled the vanity of everyone rooting for him. I myself, seated among so many, let myself be carried away by the energy, thinking I was witnessing just another predictable triumph. But when it seemed there would be no surprises, something unexpected happened. Suddenly, from the back of the cathedral, a soft, small voice asked for permission to speak. For a moment, no one took it seriously. Some laughed, others looked at each other in surprise. After all, it was the voice of a child. Voice. Who in their right mind would allow a 5-year-old girl to step into an intellectual battlefield where even scholars were defeated? The curious thing is that Leonard, upon hearing that request, did not refuse. On the contrary, he signaled for her to be brought forward. The crowd murmured, some with sarcasm, others with disdain, and I myself expected nothing more than a distraction. Yet when that small figure dressed in white walked to the center under the spotlight, the entire atmosphere seemed to shift. The noise stopped. The laughter ceased. Even the cameras, always searching for dramatic angles, froze as if they too were waiting for something they couldn't name. It was then that I understood. This would not be just another debate. Something unseen was about to happen, and none of us were prepared for the impact. Just a pause. Before continuing, I want to say that during this time, I learned that Allah asks us to care not only for our faith, but also for the body He entrusted to us. That is why I want to recommend something that can help, a practical guide on healthy living, including how to maintain discipline, energy, and balance. And as an additional gift, this material also brings a special guide on ruqya and spiritual protection to strengthen not only the body, but also the heart. She stood before everyone with the natural ease of someone who already belonged in that space. Even though she was only a child, there was no nervousness in her gestures. Her clear eyes shone under the light that poured through the stained glass windows, and the simple way her hijab was pinned only emphasized the serenity of her expression. She didn't seem like someone exposed to thousands of stares, but like a soul carrying an ancient secret. When she opened her mouth, no one expected more than childish words. Yet her voice rang firm, without shouting, without hesitation. God is not proven. God is recognized in silence. The effect was immediate. The audience, used to applause and laughter during debates, sank into a heavy silence. I myself felt the air change as if time had stopped. And then 3 questions began to hammer inside me. Who was that girl? Why did an intellectual giant like Leonard seem to lose control of his own posture? And why were those simple words dismantling the very barriers I had built for years against any notion of faith? I watched the priest closely. The man who just moments earlier seemed untouchable, accustomed to dominating crowds with brilliant reasoning, now blinked more than usual. His lips parted, as if searching for a quick response, but nothing came out. It was as if that short sentence had pierced through his layers of knowledge and struck something that titles and diplomas could not protect. Before continuing, I want to say that during this time I learned that Allah asks us to care not only for our faith, but also for the body He entrusted to us. That is why I want to recommend something that can help. A practical guide on healthy living, including how to maintain discipline, energy, and balance. And as an additional gift, this material also brings a special guide on ruqya and spiritual protection, to strengthen not only the body but also the heart. The crowd also reacted in a strange way. There were no boos, nor was there collective applause. What filled the space was collective astonishment. Some people, who until then had been smiling confidently at the priest's performance, began to shift uneasily in their seats. Others covered their faces with their hands, as if trying to hide their emotions. I even noticed a man in front of me, with tears in his eyes, though he struggled to hold them back. As for me, a deep discomfort took hold. I was a skeptic, proud of my rational stance, but the child's words were not an ordinary argument. There was no philosophical sophistication, no rhetorical devices. It was raw, direct, almost impossible to refute, because it wasn't about logic, it was about experience. It felt as though, without knowing me, she had described the emptiness I myself had been trying to disguise with reasoning. The scene lasted only a few seconds, yet it felt like an eternity. That contrast between the fragility of a little girl and the strength radiating from her left me paralyzed. There was a light that did not come from lamps or stained glass windows. It was something rising from within her, forcing everyone to look inside themselves. It was then that I understood. That night would not be remembered for the priest's sharp questions, nor for the applause of the audience. It would be remembered because, amid so much noise, a child dared to speak of silence, and made us all see it, perhaps for the first time. What followed seemed impossible to believe, even as I saw it with my own eyes. Father Leonard, known for his unshakable stance, slowly stepped down from the pulpit. Each step seemed to weigh tons. The man I had so often seen in videos, calmly and elegantly dismantling arguments, now trembled like someone who had lost the ground beneath his feet. There were no cheers, no protests, only the suffocating expectation of thousands watching without blinking. He walked toward the girl and stopped just a few feet from her. The audience held its breath, waiting for some powerful speech, perhaps a rebuttal that would restore his authority, but none of that happened. Suddenly, his legs gave way, and he knelt, bowing his head until it touched the cold floor of the cathedral. It was not a theatrical gesture, not a performance. It was surrender. The scene froze the atmosphere. Men who had always seen Leonard as a symbol of reason stared in disbelief. Women covered their mouths, unable to contain their shock. Even the camera operators, trained to capture any image without emotion, hesitated for a few seconds before resuming the frame. It was as if no one knew how to respond to an event that defied all logic. I watched, unable to move. My mind screamed that this was inconceivable. How could such a confident master bow before a child? Yet my heart recognized there was no pretense in that gesture. His face, damp with tears, revealed a weight no words could express. It was the surrender of someone finally admitting to having encountered something greater than his own pride. In that instant, I realized the true debate was not happening on the pulpit, but inside me. For years, I had built my convictions on skepticism, convinced that any belief could be dismantled with the right logic. But if even the Lion of Truth was on his knees, what foundation remained for my certainties? The girl remained silent, simply looking at him with disarming serenity. There was no triumph in her expression, no superiority. It was as if she knew this wasn't about her, but about something passing through her and touching others. That detail struck me deeply. She didn't seem surprised or proud, only present. Around us, the crowd wavered between tears, disbelief, and fear. The silence that settled was unlike any before. It wasn't the polite quiet of a formal event, but reverence before something inexplicable. I myself didn't know whether I was breathing with relief or anguish, because I felt a conflict rising within me. If this was real, then I would have to rethink the entire life I had built until then. In that shock, I understood. It wasn't just a priest falling to his knees, it was also the crumbling of many walls I had built inside myself. And without realizing it, I began to experience the same silent collapse that was transforming that man before everyone's eyes. As soon as we left the cathedral, the city was already boiling. News vans crowded the narrow streets, journalists rushed with microphones in hand, and instant headlines flashed across phone screens. Miracle or staged act? Renowned priest kneels before child. What happened inside that church? Each outlet presented its version, and the crowd split between indignation, sarcasm, and fascination. In cafes and public squares, I overheard heated conversations. Some claimed it was nothing more than a carefully staged setup. Others swore they had witnessed something divine. Politicians took advantage, casting suspicion of manipulation. The girl's name, Alia, was already circulating as a symbol, an enigma to be deciphered. The world demanded quick explanations, but all I could feel was the weight of what I had seen. Inside me, the turmoil was greater than any external noise. I had always considered myself a convinced critic of religion. I had made jokes, mocked the faith of friends, and prided myself on being someone guided only by reason. But that night, watching Leonard kneel, something shattered a barrier within me. I discovered that behind my intellectual arrogance, there was a hidden hunger, a thirst that books, theories, and debates had never managed to quench. While the media manufactured versions, I remembered the silence that overtook the cathedral. It wasn't emptiness, but a presence. That detail haunted me. I had always associated silence with absence, with nothingness. But what I felt in that moment was the opposite. There was density, there was life, as if an ancient truth had passed through us all. And that left me ashamed. I had spent years mocking what I didn't understand, and yet here I was, marked by what I had denied. I began to think of the Quran, a book I had always treated with suspicion and prejudice. I saw it as something distant, belonging to another culture, something that had nothing to say to someone like me. But now the memory of the girl's words, "God is recognized in silence," echoed in a way that made me long to understand what she carried. For the first time, I didn't want arguments to win. I wanted answers to live. The newspapers spoke of controversy, social media of spectacle, but the true earthquake was happening inside me. While the streets roared, my heart asked, what if what I witnessed was not manipulation, but the reality I had always tried to deny? What if the faith I ridiculed was exactly what I had been missing? With each memory, I felt the foundations of my old security crumble. It was as if, even far from the cathedral, the echo of that silence lingered, and the more I tried to push it away, the more it pursued me. I realized then there was no turning back. I had to confront this unrest. The curiosity about the Quran, once unthinkable for me, had become an urgent need. I no longer wanted to just observe from the outside. I wanted to finally hear what I had spent a lifetime rejecting. I returned home with my mind in turmoil. The noise of the streets, the headlines, the comments no longer mattered. What truly followed me was the need to confront what I had always kept at a distance. For the first time, I gathered the courage to open a copy of the Quran. I didn't do it as a researcher looking for flaws, nor as a skeptic searching for inconsistencies. I opened it with trembling hands, almost as though fearing what I might discover inside. The silence of my room contrasted with the turmoil I felt inside. As my eyes slid across the first lines, something caught my attention. The simplicity. Short, direct verses, filled with a serene strength. There were no ornate speeches, no theatrical tone I had so often associated with religion. There was precision, firmness, and a mercy that seemed to flow through the words. I expected to find cold, distant texts, but each sentence seemed to speak to me personally, as if it described not only the world, but also my own restlessness. There was no manipulation, no spectacle, only a truth that didn't need to raise its voice to be heard. It was as if someone whispered a memory inside me. You always searched for explanations in debates, but never wanted to listen to the silence that speaks louder than 1,000 arguments. I continued reading, trying to keep a critical distance, but it was impossible. Every passage made me stop, take a deep breath, and reflect. I, who had so often pointed out contradictions in the sacred texts of different traditions, noticed something different here. It wasn't a manual of dogmas. It was an invitation to remembrance, a reminder that life is not sustained only by reasoning, but by an invisible bond between the human and the divine. At a certain passage, I felt as if my own masks were being stripped away. The text spoke of the arrogance of those who think they can be self-sufficient, and I saw myself described there, without pretense. It was as though each line illuminated a hidden shadow. I stayed still for minutes, staring at the page while the pride I carried for so many years seemed to shrink before something infinitely greater. The mercy also unsettled me. I expected harshness, but I found compassion. I expected condemnation, but I saw comfort. And inside me an uncomfortable question arose. How many times had I rejected this book, not because it lacked meaning, but because I was afraid of what it might awaken? The night wore on, and I was still there, rereading the same verses, letting them echo in the emptiness I had once tried to mask with sarcasm and rationalism. For the first time in a long while, I felt peace. Not a peace born of quick answers, but a calm that came from within, as though someone had silenced the noise and left only clarity. And then the inevitable question pierced me. What if what I had sought in debates, in discussions, and in intellectual victories had always been hidden here in the place I least wanted to look? The days that followed were marked by a flood of news. The scene of the priest falling to his knees circulated across television channels and social media, but the way it was presented changed depending on each outlet's interest. For some, it was a miracle. For others, a dangerous performance. What no one could deny was the impact that little 5-year-old girl had caused, and it was precisely for that reason that she and her family became targets. Suddenly, reports began to suggest that the girl's parents had trained her to speak. Some commentators even claimed that it was nothing more than a strategy of religious manipulation. The words of a child, which had silenced a crowd through their simplicity, were now twisted into something suspicious, almost criminal. I read and watched it all with growing indignation. It was impossible that the same society that applauded harsh, offensive arguments against faith was now scandalized by the purity of such a sincere statement. The pressure didn't stop with the media. I learned that her father, Youssef, suddenly lost his job without explanation. Her mother began being followed by strangers in the streets, and neighbors who once treated them kindly now avoided all contact. Doors that had once been open shut quickly. The innocence of that child had become too uncomfortable for those who profited from noise. I asked myself constantly, why so much fear of such a small voice? The answer seemed obvious because truth, when spoken without interest or artifice, is impossible to control. It cannot be manipulated, nor turned into a spectacle, and that terrifies those who build their power on distorted narratives. The most paradoxical thing was that the more they tried to silence that family, the louder the echo of those words grew within me. I could no longer live as before. The sarcasm I once used to mock the faith of others lost its meaning. The harsh criticism that once gave me pleasure now sounded like cowardice. I remembered the girl's calm gaze and felt as if she were calling me to responsibility, asking for a clear stance. Either I continued hiding behind my ironies, or I admitted that something new was being born in me. I began to realize that the persecution was not just against them, but against anyone who dared to recognize truth outside the established molds. It was an effort to maintain control, to extinguish a flame that could spread. But I knew it was too late. What happened that night could not be undone. The priest, once respected for his intellect, had already been transformed by a single phrase, and I, even while resisting, could no longer see myself outside that process. Many times I felt fear for them. I worried something more serious would happen, that they would be forced to leave the country or suffer worse reprisals. But along with the fear came a strange courage. I realized that if a child could stand firm before thousands of people, I no longer had any excuse to hide from what was in front of me. The persecution of the family intensified, but to me it became increasingly clear. What they were trying to destroy was not just the voice of a little girl. It was the living reminder that God does not need rational proofs to exist. He only needs to be recognized in silence. That simplicity, which so many saw as weakness, was exactly what began to transform my life. The pressure on the family reached an unbearable point. Media speculations turned into veiled accusations, and the authorities decided to open a formal investigation to determine whether there was any kind of manipulation behind the girl's words. The court hearing was announced with great fanfare, and once again the whole city turned its eyes to them. I was there that day, sitting at the back of the room, trying not to draw attention. The atmosphere was tense. Police controlled the entrance, journalists crowded the doors, and the prosecuting lawyers spoke with confidence, repeating the same phrases I had already heard on the news. No one believes a child can speak like that alone. It is impossible she was not trained. There is indeed a hidden agenda. The words echoed like hammer blows, but they had no substance. They were constructions to feed doubt, not to bring clarity. The judge, a woman with a stern expression, gave the defense its turn. The lawyer presented documents, testimonies from neighbors, records of the family's work. Yet none of that seemed to matter as much as the collective expectation for the moment the child would be called to speak. And finally the question came, "Do you wish to say something?" Aliyah stood up. Her figure was small before the imposing bench of the court, but the silence that filled the room was absolute. She gave no elaborate speech, cited no verses, raised no voice. She only said with the same calm I remembered from the cathedral, "I only said what I felt." It was as if the air had been pulled out of the room. No one moved. Not even the prosecutors dared to interrupt. It was a simple phrase, almost ordinary, but it carried a truth that needed no explanation. I looked around and saw teary eyes, confused expressions, people who until then had seemed convinced of fraud now staring at the floor as if their own consciences weighed upon them. The lawyer tried to continue speaking, but the power of that moment had already decided more than any legal argument. The entire court hung in suspension, as though the judgment had been reversed. They, the family, were no longer the accused. It was us, every one of us present, confronted by the purity of a statement that dismantled our justifications. I felt the impact even more intensely. For years I had built the image of an unshakable skeptic, someone who always had a quick answer to ridicule any expression of faith. But when I heard that phrase, "I only said what I felt," I realized I too needed to say what was happening inside me. And the truth is that I had never had the courage to admit my spiritual hunger. I had preferred to hide behind the mask of reason rather than face the emptiness consuming me. As the girl returned to her seat, a mixture of shame and release washed over me. Shame because I realized that a 5-year-old child had more spiritual honesty than I did in 50 years of life. Release because for the first time I felt I didn't need complex answers to start changing. I only needed to acknowledge what truly lived in my heart. The judge announced she would need time to deliberate, but for me the verdict had already been rendered. It wasn't just the family on trial. I was too, and in that moment, I understood that my life could not go on as before. If even a child was able to expose herself without fear, I no longer had any justification to remain silent before the truth beginning to be born within me. That night, after leaving the courthouse, I walked aimlessly through the streets. The voices of the crowd still echoed around me, journalists, onlookers, protesters, but nothing could drown out the dialogue happening within me. Each step felt heavier, as if I were carrying years of pride, sarcasm, and resistance. I had always been the man of sharp words, the biting critic, the one who laughed at others' faith. But in the face of what I had witnessed, I realized I had reached my limit. I could no longer hide behind masks. I got home late. I didn't turn on the lights, I didn't turn on the TV. I left only the window open, and the moon slipped silently into the room. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to organize my thoughts, but my mind was a whirlwind. Then I found myself silently repeating the girl's phrase. I only said what I felt. It sounded like a direct calling, and for the first time, I didn't try to rationalize it. I simply let the words echo within me. I stood up slowly and knelt. It felt strange, almost uncomfortable at first. I had spent my life scorning the act of bowing, telling myself it was humiliating, something for the weak. But in that moment, bending my knees didn't feel like defeat. It felt like freedom. There, alone in my room, I sensed I was carrying too much weight to keep standing before myself. With my eyes closed, I confessed what I had never admitted to anyone. My arrogance, my intellectual vanity, the pleasure I took in ridiculing others. I asked for forgiveness, not out loud, but in thought. I asked for guidance, like someone lost who no longer knows where to go. It was then that I remembered the Shahada, the declaration of faith I had heard recited so many times, but had treated until then as mere formality. I took a deep breath and let the words come from my lips. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. I bear witness that there is no deity but Allah, and I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. At the very moment I pronounced the Shahada, the room, which had felt heavy and stifling, filled with an indescribable calm. There were no voices, no visions, no spectacle. There was only silence. But it wasn't the empty silence I had always feared. It was a luminous silence like the one I felt in the cathedral when that child spoke. It was as if something invisible had rested upon me, removing fear and replacing it with peace. I cried, not out of sadness but relief. Each tear seemed to carry away years of cynicism and resistance. The pride that had so often guided me gave way to a new humility. The fear I had so often hidden behind jokes and criticism lost its power before the feeling of finally being held. I no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. I had found what, without realizing it, I had been seeking all along. I stayed on my knees for long minutes, perhaps hours. I can't say how long. I only know that I rose from there a different man, not a perfect or enlightened man, but someone who had finally admitted the simplest truth. I needed God. And he had always been there, waiting for me to quiet myself inside so I could hear him. The next morning, when I looked in the mirror, I noticed something in my face had changed. It wasn't a visible transformation, but a lightness I had never seen in myself. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel ashamed of who I was. I understood that true conversion doesn't begin with applause or outward displays, but in the quiet depths of the heart. The turning point didn't erase my past, but it gave it new meaning. Every mistake, every mockery, every resistance now became a reminder of how blind I had been before seeing. And although I knew many around me wouldn't understand my choice, I had no doubts within. I wasn't seeking approval. I only wanted to remain faithful to what I had found that night, the presence of Allah, which isn't proven by theories, but recognized in the silence that transforms. After that night, my life took a direction I never would have imagined before. Each dawn began to carry a new purpose. I no longer wake up only to complete tasks or defend ideas. I wake to seek understanding, to learn to pray, and to cultivate a faith I once ridiculed. The journey is still recent, but each step teaches me more about patience, discipline, and surrender. I began studying the Quran with dedication, not like someone analyzing a text to find flaws, but like someone seeking nourishment. With each reading, I realize those words don't belong only to the past. They speak directly to the present. It isn't simple. Many times I feel like an awkward beginner trying to pronounce prayers correctly, trying to align mind and heart. Yet each small achievement fills me with gratitude. I also started revisiting my own history, especially the marks I left on other people. I remember the times I treated friends' faith with sarcasm, as if believing in something greater than reason were an inferiority. Today I understand that my words hurt more than I would like to admit. This recognition stings, but it pushes me toward reconciliation. I've been seeking out those I ridiculed, and when I can't find them, I pray that God allows me to make amends in another way. It wasn't easy dealing with the surprise of family and colleagues. Many didn't understand the change. Some reacted with irony, others with coldness. But amid these reactions, I also found unexpected welcome. People I once judged as distant came closer to teach me, guide me, and help me take my first steps in faith. This support network has been proof that life in community is a gift and that no one grows alone. The gratitude I feel can't be contained within me. I feel the need to share, to tell what I experienced, because I know someone may be exactly where I once was, hiding spiritual hunger behind a wall of rationality. That's why I recorded this testimony, not to exalt my story, but to show that transformation is possible, even for the most skeptical and proud. If this account reached your heart, I leave a special request. Consider using Super Thanks. This financial contribution helps the channel continue bringing stories like mine to more people in different countries and cultures. Each support is more than a material gesture. It's a way to spread hope, to allow testimonies to reach those who may be on the verge of giving up. Today I keep learning step by step, stumbling and getting back up. My prayer is that each day be an opportunity to grow in humility, to repair wrongs, and to recognize Allah's mercy in details I once ignored. The life I once treated as a stage for debates has now become a school of silence and surrender. And in this learning, my greatest certainty is this: gratitude is not just a feeling, it is a commitment, and my commitment is to live and share the truth I have finally found. My soul is serene, and there is a new awareness about everything I have lived. It wasn't simple to expose my flaws reveal my past arrogance, and tell how everything collapsed before such an unexpected scene. Even so, I know that every word spoken here may find someone who needs to hear exactly this, that it is not too late to change, that no one is too far from God's mercy. When I remember that girl standing before a crowd, I realize that strength is not in the volume of the voice, but in the truth it carries. I was just a man sitting in the back of the cathedral, skeptical, convinced that nothing could shake me. Yet a single, simple sentence was enough to transform my entire life. That shows me we don't need grand speeches to see the path. Sometimes a spark of sincerity is enough for the light to begin to shine. That is why I leave a request to you who have come this far. Share this video in groups and on social media. Perhaps someone living submerged in noise, surrounded by theories, doubts, or irony, is waiting for a minute of silence to finally listen to the truth. You may be the link that carries this message to the one who needs it most.